Texas has filed a bill that would make consenting to gender-affirming care child abuse with prison sentences for parents. According to queer legislative researcher Erin Reed, the bill will mean a rounding up of trans kids if passed. She tweeted, "In Virginia, a bill has been released which would ban transgender people from sports that match their gender identity if passed. It requires the physical examination to include biological sex." Meanwhile, in Ohio, a motion to force a vote to tell all schools in Ohio that Title IX rights should be denied to trans students has been denied 9-10.
Erin Reed joins us now to discuss this and to expand on the legislation being introduced across the country. Welcome, Erin.
Thank you.
So what are your views on these efforts to prohibit this kind of care and such things?
Yeah, so I think that we're seeing a national movement by those on the right to essentially ban gender-affirming care, force affirming teachers to misgender and use incorrect names for transgender students, as well as ban transgender people from participation in many areas of public life. And so I am opposed to these particular issues, but nonetheless, we are seeing these kinds of bills proliferate around the country.
So to what do you attribute that? I mean, on one hand, it does seem like Republicans are very much exploiting a cultural shift, as it were. I think progressives, liberals have largely been winning a lot of victories with respect to LGBTQIA rights for the last 10, 15, 20 years or so, and what might be described as kind of the post-Will and Grace era. And it has felt like we're winning until you get to this certain point that perhaps there are these moments where culture moves a little bit faster, like maybe popular culture moves a little bit faster than traditional parts of the country, and Republicans are exploiting this tipping point. Is there any conversation happening about whether or not there are moments to revise and reevaluate? So the focus has become on kids under 18 and what might be probably outlier cases of people potentially getting treatment that wasn't well indicated, having regrets. Detransitioners are a big part of the conversation. What do people say, or what is the in-group in-community conversation like about whether or not there is any opportunity there for recalibrating, or is it all considered to be in bad faith?
So in the post-2016 era, whenever the North Carolina bathroom ban was passed and then later undefeated, we have seen a reaction against transgender acceptance in the United States. And I do think that this is because there has been more visibility of transgender people. People do feel more free to be themselves, to come out, and therefore you see people being transgender in public visibly. As a result, I do think that this is scary to some people. People don't a lot of times understand transgender people. And that can lead to misunderstandings that then get targeted via legislation. I think we've seen this with several minority communities in America going back all throughout history. And so I do want to caution people from overreading the attempts to ban gender-affirming care, because one thing that I will note is that last year we did have the most ever anti-trans and anti-LGBTQ bills filed in the United States, something around 250 depending on which source you use. The vast majority of those were defeated, including in red states, places like South Dakota, places like Missouri. And so I think it's important for for Republicans, for instance, not to overplay their hand on this issue.
That's well taken. So I'm seeing some concerns, though, expressed by people, not just people who are Republicans. There was a write-up in the New York Times about puberty blockers, making note of some objections that even some some scientist people have, that there's not been enough research on how this could affect, that it does in fact affect bone density in some people. There are studies in Nordic countries and England going on. There's been a kind of, it looks like to me, an easing off of how readily puberty blockers will be prescribed to very young people. What do you make of those concerns? And that's really what we're talking about. I agree with the bathroom stuff, really dumb. I don't know. Who cares who uses what bathroom? I don't know why we're concentrating on that at all. But the concern that parents have, that I understand, that young people who can't consent to all sorts of things, and what should the proper process should be, given what looked to me like not totally unfounded concerns about these medical treatments.
Of course. So gender-affirming care, especially among transgender youth, is a very complex issue. And given the medical consensus right now in America, among all of the major medical organizations in the efficacy of their treatment, but also given concerns that other organizations might have and other activists might have, the decision, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many legislatures around the United States, is that this is a complex decision that should be left between families and their doctors. It is whenever you try to legislate what a family can do with their doctors and with their care teams that you start running into issues. I do think that in your particular case, around detransitioners, for instance, they deserve love and support and acceptance, and they deserve all of the resources that we can give them. I will note, though, that the current wave of political detransitioners who are advocating against transgender care in legislatures around the United States remind me very similar to the ex-gay movement of the 1990s and the early 2000s. You have them being paraded out in front of public, essentially claiming that gender-affirming care and that being trans is a fad and it's something that you can fall back from. And this may be true for some people. However, the vast majority of people, and I know many detransitioners myself personally, who detransition don't do so because they're not transgender. They do so because they face family unacceptance, they face peer abuse, they face the lack of ability to be employed as a result of being trans. And the fear that's within the detransitioning community is high. And so I think that we need to turn down the temperature, especially around detransitioners. I've heard
some detransitioners describe that, but also as a pressure to have transitioned in the first place, due to a kind of, maybe they're not non-binary or they don't easily match male or female stereotypes, and they're, obviously young people are much more fluid in their gender expression, which I am totally fine with. I think a concern that some parents or even some scientists, some people would have, is that just a broader trend toward gender fluidity that is fine or should be accepted, but then is getting more of those young people will be swept up and will be easily affirmed and then maybe transition when actually all they were was gender fluid.
So I'm really glad that you brought this up, because it's actually, in the opinion of many people within the activist community, the high levels of gatekeeping that lead to that. Mm-hmm. Because what you end up having is gender fluid people, or people that are that may be transgender but may not be seeking a full medical transition, essentially having to pursue a full medical transition in order to get legal acceptance. Mm-hmm. And so in many states, for instance, you have things like medical transition required for legal acceptance. Mm-hmm. And so it is in these heightening of gates and the narrowing of pathways in which a transgender person can experience being transgender that I think you do see people that feel like they might have to portray themselves in that way.
Do you mean in order to like have the right description on an identification card or something? Was that what you're...
Description on an identification card, changing your birth certificate, having access to bathrooms, sports teams, etc. So it's in these laws that I think are being proposed in order to prevent that issue, that you're actually seeing it heighten that issue. And so I think that we should allow transgender youth and gender diverse youth to have a variety of options and leave these decisions between the families and their doctors. And I think even in very Republican states, this argument has landed, and people do realize that maybe this isn't something that we should legislate.
Yeah, there seems to be something obviously libertarian about your position to say let it stay between parents and families. And obviously that doesn't mean that there are, you can talk to detransitioners who will make a very compelling case for why they have regrets, but that doesn't mean anything about people who want to make a different kind of decision, or the fact that living life does not insulate you from having regrets about all kinds of decisions that we make. And in other contexts, we don't say we're going to take parents away from children. Remember, the context in which we're having this conversation is a bill to make it criminal for parents to support gender-affirming care, which you should also say is a pretty broad category that has largely gone undefined here. But would you also include things like allowing people to use the name of their choosing and use the pronouns of their choosing and to dress in the way that they choose, to be part of what you would describe as gender-affirming care? And is that kind of care implicated in a bill like this, or is it stricter? Is it more strictly about medical interventions?
It depends on the bill. So in Texas, no. In Texas, it is strictly puberty blockers and hormone therapy. However, we did see in Florida, for instance, the Department of Health release guidance that stated that social transition should also be included. And so you are seeing an expansion of what they're willing to go after, what they're willing to target. I know that we recently saw in Tennessee a bill that would define male and female impersonators, for instance, as being covered under anti-sexuality laws and obscenity laws. And so we are seeing an expansion. We're seeing an expansion in age ranges. In some cases, like in Missouri, they've proposed going up to the age of 25. And, I think that people, especially certain legislatures and certain politicians, are focusing in on this the wrong way. And I think that they're actually hurting the people that they're trying to help in doing this.
Yeah, look, I don't have any appetite whatsoever to really get the government involved in this question, or really any question. But I think that, just to represent what people who are concerned about this will say, I think they have an image in their head of you have a kid, a young teen or a preteen, maybe a boy, but is interested in dresses, is interested in dolls. If they end up talking to a counselor with a more progressive or activist worldview, they might very quickly be put down a pathway toward puberty blockers and transitioning, when odds are that kid might just be gay, they might just be a feminine boy, etc. That's a concern I hear. In your experience, from your knowledge of the community, is it as easy as that, or is there pushback and interrogation of, what do you actually want? Are you just uncomfortable in your body because it's hard to go through puberty, it's hard to be a teenager? Those kinds of questions. There's a fear that it's being the pathway is too easy, and then you'll end up getting more false positives given this greater gender fluidity.
Of course. And so I speak to many families of transgender youth. I've helped several families of transgender youth. And I can say that of my personal experience, this is what I can speak to my personal experience, all of them that I've spoken to have had years of psychological care, years of care teams, have met with multiple doctors. Many parents initially were unsupportive that have become supportive of transition care for their kids. Not all of them are seeking medical transitions either. I think that this is a complex issue, undoubtedly is a complex issue, around gender-affirming care for trans youth and the different forms that can take. But again, I really do think that in these cases where there are complex issues and where there is a variety of medical guidance, that you have to allow families to make that decision. And there might be decisions that are wrongly made, but that's the case, I think, in all kinds of care that you would get for kids.
Yeah, the what about the children is really the linchpin for a lot of these conservative arguments, because they think they understand that it seems extremely invasive to be telling now 25-year-olds what they can and cannot do. And it does seem like a lot of the fear-mongering, the preciousness about kids is about specifically people's prurient fascination with people's sexuality, their sex lives, their sexual organs in particular. And there is a part of me that sometimes says, okay, if it's all about the kids, if you can get all these Republicans to let go of this by simply saying we're not going to do anything until folks are 18, is that a concession that should be made? On the other hand, I understand that there are a lot of people who sincerely stick with their transitions, who feel like if they had been able to start earlier, if they had been able to start on these hormone blockers and stuff earlier, that they would be better able to pass, that their life in their chosen gender would be easier, because we still do live in a world where people are very hostile to trans people, and the ability to pass is somewhat coveted. But this gets back to the point that Robbie was making earlier, how much of this is about people's discomfort with being gender non-conforming, and does wanting to help people get access to hormones, et cetera, earlier, is that just me or a good well-meaning left person buying into the value of passing? Do you know what I'm saying? It's an interesting back and forth that I have with myself psychologically.
Of course. And, I think that there are so many things that have to be considered whenever you're making these decisions. And I think that everybody is doing the best that they can. I truly think that the parents want the best for their kids. I think that the doctors want the best for their kids. I even think that the legislatures want the best for the kids, regardless of Republican or Democratic legislatures. Mm-hmm. And as long as we are approaching this from that perspective, I think that ultimately we have to trust the families. Like, we have to. Mm-hmm. We trust the families in so many other areas of life. And you hear right now parental rights being a big thing around transgender issues. And I think for ideological consistency here, we need to have parental rights in terms of how you determine the care that your kid receives. And I mean, we're all doing the best we can. Parents are doing the best as they can. And, I think that for a lot of kids, for a lot of transgender kids, this care does make a huge difference in their lives. And, withdrawing that care also would make a huge difference in their lives. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Erin Reed. This has been a really wonderful conversation.
Of course.
Tomorrow on Rising, we'll be breaking down more of the FTX drama. We'll have Yahoo Finance reporter Kevin Cirilli. You won't want to miss that.
Yeah, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content at all. And for those of you who prefer to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. We're also available on Roku and other streaming services, so you can catch us there as well.
See you tomorrow.
Bye-bye.